This week's Piltch Point with Avram Piltch is proudly powered by PureVPN. Speaking of obfuscation, sometimes you want to obfuscate your internet history, your internet browsing, whether you're trying to keep Facebook and Google from tracking your moves for whatever weird thing they're tracking it for, or you want to keep your browsing history private from your internet service provider. PureVPN is a great way to do that. And also, it allows you to report that you're physically somewhere else. So when we were at Collision a couple months ago, we wanted to be able to watch Hulu. We couldn't, but with PureVPN, we could say we were still home and still use our Hulu. And right now, for our viewers, we've got a really great deal. Instead of $10.95 a month, you can get 2 years of PureVPN service for $2.88 a month. That is a 74% savings and a really great deal. And you can find out all about that by going to pilchpoint.live/PureVPN. So we have talked, Avram, about a little project that you've been working on. But I know that there's a lot of stuff in addition to the little arcade cabinet. There's other stuff that goes into playing games, right?
Yeah, so I wanted to talk about just how easy it is, relatively speaking, although there's some challenges these days, to set up your own retro arcade system. And when I say retro arcade system, I mean not just arcade games, but the ability to play Nintendo Nintendo 64 games, SNES games, Atari 2600 games. There's at least 10 different systems, maybe a dozen systems that you can easily emulate. And of course, you can do this on a PC by going and downloading some of these emulators. There are a few different sites devoted to this. But the one thing a lot of people like to do with their Raspberry Pi, and you'll forgive me for being a big Pi promoter, is to use them to create emulation systems, because that way you can actually combine them with physical hardware, like a joystick and buttons, like an old-fashioned joystick and buttons, or you can at the very least attach it to your TV, spend $35 on a Raspberry Pi and turn it into a console without using your PC to do it, which is good if you have kids. So, I've shown not long ago that I have a couple of things that do this. Here's one that I built myself. So this, this system here uses a Raspberry Pi 3B. You can see if you open it up here, that's what's inside. And all the little arcade buttons here connect to a USB controller board on the inside, as does the joystick. One thing that's a little bit limitation about the controller USB controller I used is I had to find a way of routing a USB cable, so I had to cut holes in the box just to have this ugly cable going on the outside, which is kind of lame. But the bottom line is you can do this kind of thing for real cheap. And the emulation software is free. So what do you do if you want to get started? First of all, you should, if you don't own a Raspberry Pi, you should get one. Now, normally I'm a big proponent of getting the latest and greatest, which would be the Raspberry Pi 4. But as of this date, the emulation software, the leading emulation platforms, which for Raspberry Pi, which are called RetroPie and Laka, are both don't have a release version that supports the Raspberry Pi 4. I have an article up on Tom's Hardware that explains how you can use the beta version of Laka, or you can kind of hack RetroPie 4 to work on the Raspberry Pi 4. But if you want to make your life easy, and if you get a Raspberry Pi 3B, those will work out of the box at this moment because the release software works with them. So if you say, and I think of those two, RetroPie is definitely the more popular. You can get it at retropie.org. And you actually don't even have to install it. You can download a micro SD card image, burn, as in write the image to a micro SD card, stick it into your Raspberry Pi, connect your Raspberry Pi to power and your TV and a controller. A standard Xbox or PlayStation controller will do, and you're off and running. Now, the other thing you have to do, obviously, is have ROMs. ROMs are what you call ripped cartridges or discs that ran on, that were originally made to run on the original system, whether that was an arcade machine like old Space Invaders, or it was a Nintendo cartridge, or an Atari cartridge, or a Sega CD. Now, technically speaking, downloading such things is at best a legal gray area. Probably, really, probably not something we can recommend. But a lot of people do download their ROMs from various sites. You can search for yourself, or if you own some of those cartridges and you're able to rip them into ROMs, you can use those. But the results are pretty impressive once you get some games up and running and you copy them over to your RetroPie box. I mean, it's just really easy. Even with the Raspberry Pi 3B, which is just 1 gigabyte of RAM and not the world's fastest computer, it can run up to, I think, SNES games or even Game Boy games, Atari games, regular old arcade games, Commodore 64, really, really, really well. And of course, it gets a lot more fun if you buy a kit that allows you to build something like this, or you can get a more complete kit like I have here. Whoa, is it plugged in? This is the Picade that I've shown before. You can get this in a version for the Raspberry Pi 3, but they sent me the one for the 4, so I'm having a little trouble getting the software to work because, as I said, you have to hack it a little bit, which I did, but now it won't boot, so I got to reinstall it because they give you the pieces to make the machine, but you got to download the free software yourself. So, as I said, right now, Pi 4 is not really supported. So while you can use it, you got to kind of change some files, and not everything works well. But if you have a 3, you can get a model that works with the 3, and you can build an arcade machine like this. This thing costs, I think, around $200 to build this box. But if you just want to get the parts to make a joystick, and you want to get a box or something, then you're talking about maybe $30-$40 to make something like this. If you already have the Raspberry Pi, which itself is about $30. So I just wanted to mention that because it's something my son and I have had a ton of fun with. He really enjoys playing the old classic games, and it's been really easy to set these up and get up and running, and be able to expose him to all kinds of games that I played in my youth.
Which we've talked a number of times about some of the benefits of that, the lack of DRM or not DRM, DLC and stuff like that. So they're complete games in one package, which is fun. There's no, hey, you can't do this.
It's funny because my son has gotten a real, he's 7 and he's gotten a real sense of like what constitutes an arcade game versus a regular video game. So he was playing a game on his Sphero Bolt, which is a, which is a robotic ball. But it's interesting because now they have an app where you can use the Sphero Bolt ball as a controller. And the app looks a lot like Galaga. You have like a little spaceship and you got to shoot asteroids and aliens, right? And you do it by moving the ball around. And he said, I realize this is an arcade game, which means you just keep going until you die. There's no end of the game.
Uh-huh.
And and that's kind of his definition of an arcade game. It's a never-ending game. Um, which, when you think about it,
Not bad.
today's games, a lot of them have an end.
Mm-hmm.
They have a story that ends. But the story of Dig Dug never ends until you die. You'll be violently causing little lizards to explode, dropping rocks on violently on these things. I don't know what you call them. Until you eventually succumb. But you know, you'll be eating little dots in Pac-Man until eventually the ghost gets you. It's like life's a maze and then you die. But
That's
all I
interesting.
can say for the all I can say for the parents out there is that building a retro system is a great like thing you can do with your kids, and then you can give them a taste of the things that you played when you were little. And I've been surprised at how, even though my son has played some really advanced games on his Xbox and even on the PC, playing old arcade games, he still really enjoys them. So there's something timeless about that.
I definitely agree with that. I think that's why it's viewed as nostalgia, but I don't think that's really what it is. I think there really is a certain level of the games themselves are timeless. There's not. They may be significantly simpler, both in concept and in graphics, for sure, from say a Call of Duty today, but there's they're just fun. There's not the stress and frustration that comes along with World of Warcraft or whatever. There's it's just silly fun.
Yeah, I also feel like the control. I mean, you can play these on a modern controller, and we have, but I think the controls are part of the fun. Um, we have at the office, someone from Tom's Guide got sent to them a, what is the name of that? One Arcade, um, one of those retro systems that you build.
Hmm.
It is not a Raspberry Pi system as far as I can tell. It has like 5 games on it. It's like Centipede and Millipede, and it's a trackball system. Like that's what you've got. You don't have
Okay.
a joystick. And I remember that so fondly, like it's the trackball that made the game.
Hmm.
Like it's not the same playing Centipede with a joystick. It's not the same playing Asteroids with a joystick. You know. So
Because one of the things that we've talked about on some of our other shows is one of the things that makes art interesting is the limitation, whether it be
yep.
self imposed or whatever. Doing a complex thing just in charcoal or whatever. It's the limitation that makes art interesting, and it wasn't self imposed. It was a technological imposition of a limitation on games at the time. The idea of a system being able to respond to 16 inputs with precision was not possible at the time. I mean, now we can do it in a $25 Raspberry Pi, but at the time, multi-thousand-dollar arcade machine wasn't going to be able to respond to the kind of input that we use today. So there were input limitations, there were processor limitations, all kinds of things, and I think it's those limitations that made the art form, made the games more interesting.
Yep. So the name of the just to clarify, the name of the company that makes stand-up arcade machines, which you can buy and put together, is Arcade One Up. Um, but if you want to build if you want to build the little arcade machine I have here, that is a Piecade from Pi Moroni, and that's available on Amazon and wherever wherever Raspberry Pi stuff is sold. I also recommend, even if you don't necessarily want to buy the whole cabinet, they make kits that will make it easy for you to make a box like this, so you don't have to drill holes like I did, which was the most time-consuming thing, and come with all the parts you need. So at least you can hook that up to a TV and control it from there. Of course, having the screen built in is definitely a big plus and giving you more of that arcade experience that I think we all want to have. So yeah, I definitely recommend checking it out. There's a lot of competing kits on Amazon. If you look for arcade joystick or arcade kit, um, you can find a million different kinds of buttons. Um, I definitely went through a few different kinds when building this. Some of them I like the click of better than the others, I'll tell you. Um, but it's all in the service of like getting back that great experience that I had when I was like 10 years old going to the arcade. And now you can go to Dave and Buster's or some modern arcade, but they don't have that many retro machines.
Yeah.
So more things are kind of designed for, more serious type of games. Like my son was asking me, when can we go to a retro arcade? And I was like, I don't know where there's a retro arcade. I not around here. I don't see any. So like, it's not necessary. I mean, there's a few places in the world where you can, but if you really want to have that old fashioned arcade experience that there's nothing like, you might have to get something and put something together in your house.
Well, when it comes to retro arcades, I have seen them start popping up recently. We've got two that I know of here in our local area that have popped up just in the last like year and a half, 2 years. But they tend to not be aimed at kids. They tend to be aimed at you and I. They're oftentimes bars that have a whole bunch of retro arcade machines. When I was in New Orleans for Collision last year, I met up with a friend from our South Florida convention scene who's in the Coast Guard there, and we went to a barcade, and it was a whole bunch of retro arcade machines that we got to play around with at a bar restaurant thing. It was a really interesting experience, and it was all almost entirely all retro stuff, which was a tremendous amount of fun. But obviously, that's not the kind of environment we're probably going to take a
Probably
7-year-old
not.
to. But I know that there are other. We've got one in the area that's just like primarily like a pinball place, and they've got a bunch of them, and they're targeted at kids, and they've got retro machines too. So it's possible that, I mean, you could have one in your area. I just wouldn't know how to find it.
Yeah, I mean, I was googling this. Apparently, there was a convention the other day, like a retro gaming convention that lasted for 2 days, and you could go there. But that was a temporary thing. So yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's somewhere, but I think for most people, the way you're going to get to share this experience with your kids
Yeah.
is to find a way of building a system. What I will say is, obviously, there are a lot of resources online, but I do have an article for those who want to try it who are having difficulty and want to try running, doing emulation on the Raspberry Pi 4. They have a Raspberry Pi 4. They want to get the emulation running. You can look on tomshardware.com. We have it in our nav under Raspberry Pi in the top nav, how you can do emulation on the 4. On the 3, it's so easy. All you really have to do is go to retropie.org and follow the instructions there.
That obviously makes it way easier, but you know, if you're trying to prepare for the future and you get the new hardware, it's nice that there's
Yeah,
some help from you out there.
yeah. I mean, I expect within. I check every day. It's been like 2 months that people have been waiting for official support. It's got to be any time within the next like 3-4 weeks that there'll be an official version of RetroPie. But the volunteers who do RetroPie are very cagey about it. They won't, you know, they don't want to give a timetable or anything like that.
They don't want to commit to
On the
something.
other hand,
They don't want to commit to
yeah,
something that have something come up in their personal lives and not be
yeah,
able
yeah,
to fulfill that commitment, and then they look silly. And yeah, I understand.
exactly. So, but everyone's waiting with bated breath because lots of people are buying the new Pi as they should, and so they want to be able to run emulation on it.
Makes sense. Well, as always, Avram, I love hearing about the projects that you're working on and all of that stuff, because you've been working on some really fun stuff, and I really love the retro arcade stuff. I've been looking at I've been wanting to do a Raspberry Pi game setup, and I found a 3D print model for a Nintendo 64, a miniature Nintendo 64 body that I
Oh
think
yeah, oh
is what
yeah.
I want to do.
They sell those. You don't need a 3D print. They sell it the case on Amazon for like $25. That makes it look like a Nintendo 64, or at least it makes it look like an SNES. So you can get cases that look like that, no problem. Uh, and you can get controllers that look like original Nintendo controllers too.
And you can even, if you're worried about the whole emulation thing, you can actually get USB cartridge readers, and literally read right off the original cartridges. So there, all kinds of interesting and unique ways of doing it. So it's there's a lot of fun to be had in that space, I think. Well, like I said, thanks for talking about what it takes to get it done, and I look forward to what we talk about next.